Thomas Silverstein. Thomas Edward Silverstein, February 4, 1952 to May 11, 2019, was an American criminal who spent the last 42 years of his life in prison after being convicted of 4 separate murders while imprisoned for armed robbery, one of which was overturned. Silverstein spent the last 36 years of his life in solitary confinement for killing corrections officer Merle Klutz at the Marion Penitentiary in Illinois. Prison authorities described him as a brutal killer and a former leader of the Aryan Brotherhood prison gang. Silverstein maintained that the dehumanizing conditions inside the prison system contributed to the 3 murders he committed. He was held in a specially designed cell in what is called Range 13 at ADX Florence Federal Penitentiary in Colorado. He was the longest held prisoner in solitary confinement within the Bureau of Prisons at the time of his death. Many prison guards refused to talk to Silverstein out of respect for Klutz. Silverstein was born in Long Beach, California, to Virginia Conway. Conway had divorced her first husband in 1952 while pregnant with Silverstein and married Thomas Conway, who Silverstein claimed was his biological father. 4 years later, Virginia divorced Conway and married Sid Silverstein, who legally adopted her son. Silverstein was timid, awkward, shy, and frequently bullied as a child in the middle-class neighborhood where the family lived, in part because his peers mistakenly believed he was Jewish. Virginia Silverstein demanded that her son fight back, telling the boy that if he ever came home again crying because he had been beaten up by a bully, she would be waiting to give him another beating. Silverstein states, "That's how my mom was. She stood her mud. If someone came at you with a bat, you got your bat and you both went at it." At age 14, Silverstein was sentenced to a California Youth Authority reformatory where, he said, his attitudes about violence were reinforced. Anyone not willing to fight was abused. In 1971, at age 19, Silverstein was sent to San Quentin Prison in California for armed robbery. 4 years later, he was paroled, but he was arrested soon after along with his father, Thomas Conway, and his cousin, Gerald Horff, for 3 armed robberies. Their take was less than $11,000. In 1977, Silverstein was sentenced to 15 years for armed robbery, to be served at United States Penitentiary in Leavenworth, Kansas. Murders at USP Marion. Silverstein became involved with the Aryan Brotherhood while at Leavenworth. Silverstein was convicted in 1980 of the murder of inmate Danny Atwell, who allegedly refused to serve as a mule for heroin moving through the jail. He was condemned to life in prison and transferred to the U.S. Penitentiary in Marion, Illinois, USP Marion, which was a high-security facility at the time. The conviction was overturned in 1985 when it was discovered that the jailhouse informants who testified during his trial had lied on the stand. At Marion, Silverstein was housed in the Control Unit, a virtual solitary confinement regime reserved for extreme management problems, prisoners prone to assaultive and disruptive behavior, in the prison. Silverstein was charged with the murder of Robert Chappell, a member of the D.C. Blacks prison gang, in 1981. Silverstein and another inmate, Clayton Fountain, were found guilty, and Silverstein was sentenced to life in prison. He avoided a probable death sentence because capital punishment had not yet been restored on a federal level. Silverstein insisted on his innocence. While Silverstein was on trial for Chappell's murder, the Bureau of Prisons moved the national commander of the D.C. Blacks prison gang, Raymond Lee Cadillac Smith, from another prison to the Marion Control Unit. According to jail files, Smith began attempting to kill Silverstein as soon as he got at the control unit. "I attempted to convince Cadillac that I didn't kill Chappell, but he didn't believe me and bragged about killing me," Silverstein claimed. "Everyone was aware of what was going on, and no one attempted to keep us apart. The guards desired that one of us kill the other." Silverstein and Clayton Fountain stabbed Smith 67 times with homemade weapons. They hauled Smith's body up and down the catwalk in front of the cells after he died, presenting it to the other convicts. Silverstein was sentenced to life in prison once more. Silverstein assassinated correction officer Merle Klutz at USP Marion on October 22, 1983. Silverstein employed a ruse to get Klutz to move ahead of him after being taken out of his cell for a shower, and then positioned himself between Klutz and other officers. He came to a halt outside the cell of Randy Gomez, another inmate. Gomez handed Silverstein a makeshift jail knife and unlocked his restraints with a homemade key. Klutz was then attacked by Silverstein, who repeatedly stabbed him. Silverstein later claimed he murdered Klutz in retribution for Klutz's intentional harassment of him. Klutz was accused of destroying paintings by Silverstein, among other things. Murder of Correction Officer Klutz. Clayton Fountain, another Aryan Brotherhood member, used the same approach to murder Correctional Officer Robert Hoffman a few hours later. USP Marion was thereafter placed on indefinite lockdown, which lasted for the next 23 years. Following Klutz's murder, Silverstein was moved to the United States Penitentiary in Atlanta and held in solitary confinement. His security level was listed as no human contact. The events surrounding the murders of Correctional Officer Klutz and Hoffman influenced the design of the federal supermax prison, the United States Penitentiary, Florence, Administrative Maximum Facility, USP Florence ADMAX, which opened in 1994 and was designed to house the most dangerous inmates in the federal prison system. ADX Florence detained both Silverstein and Gomez. Fountain died at the United States Medical Center for Federal Prisoners in Springfield, Missouri in 2004. Riot in Atlanta and transfer to Leavenworth. During the Atlanta prison riots in 1987, Cuban detainees at the federal penitentiary in Atlanta liberated Silverstein from his isolation cell. 1 week later, they turned Silverstein over to the Federal Bureau of Investigation's hostage rescue team. Officials at the Bureau of Prisons were reportedly concerned that Silverstein would begin killing correctional personnel held hostage by the Cubans. Before releasing Silverstein to the Bureau of Prisons, the Cubans let him out of his isolation cell and allowed him to travel freely throughout the prison. One of the captive prison officers had a reputation of being nice to Silverstein. When the guard handcuffed Silverstein, he made a point of asking if his shackles were too tight. Silverstein challenged him and finally spared him. Negotiators for the Bureau of Prisons were able to persuade the Cuban riot leaders to hand over Silverstein as a demonstration of good faith, a relatively easy decision for them given that Silverstein's status was peripheral to the Cuban leaders' ambitions during the conflict. Silverstein was later transferred back to Leavenworth, where he remained for the following 18 years. When USP Leavenworth was reduced to a medium security facility in 2005, Silverstein was sent to ADX Florence, a Colorado supermax facility. His earliest possible release date was November 2, 2095. Allegations of torture and injustice. According to Silverstein, the no human contact condition is effectively a type of torture reserved for people who murder correctional employees. A Bureau of Prisons officer told author Pete Early, when an inmate kills a guard, he must be punished. We can't execute Silverstein, so we must make his life a living hell. Otherwise, other convicts will murder guards as well. There must be some form of ultimate punishment. Every prisoner understands what Silverstein is going through. We want them to understand that if they cross the same line he did, they would pay dearly. Ted Sellers, a former criminal who encountered Silverstein during his 25-year incarceration, said Silverstein became a legend at Leavenworth. According to the Sellers, he is not as awful as they paint him to be. Sure, he's dangerous if they force him up against the wall. However, there were some filthy horrible guards at Marion. They would purposefully mislead you. You're dealing with someone who is locked up 24 hours a day. Of course, he has a temper. Death. Silverstein died on May 11, 2019, at St. Anthony Hospital in Lakewood, Colorado, after spending 36 years in solitary confinement. He died from complications from heart surgery.